Welcome back to part 2 of replacing the fuel line on your Stihl MS180C chainsaw. I have the fuel line here that I picked up yesterday at my local Stihl dealer, and we're going to put it back on. So first of all, the part number for the fuel line is 1130 358 7700. Now the very first thing you want to do in reinstalling the fuel line is to install it in the fuel tank. So just grab the long end here that's got a twist in it like that, insert it into the hole of the fuel tank. You'll have to squeeze it in there like that. The little pointy arrow here on the fuel line points toward the duckbill valve, toward the gas cap. Now what you want to do is to insert this part of the fuel line here, which is kind of like a grommet, into the fuel tank. So you can twist it like this and push down as you're doing this. If you find it hard, you can put a bit of liquid wrench on the fuel line. It'll make it a lot easier. I purposely did not use a screwdriver to put it back in because it's so easy to puncture them. So I'd rather fiddle with it a bit longer with my hands and know that there's not going to be a hole in the fuel line. So now the next thing to do is install the fuel filter in the tank. What you want to do now is to retrieve the fuel line with that little hook that you've used previously. Pull the fuel line out like this. Once you've got the line fully pulled like this, insert your fuel filter. All the way so the end of the hose hits the filter, so then you know it's in right. Then just reinsert the filter. And now we're ready to reinstall the fuel tank. Now just grab the saw and reinsert the fuel tank. Don't push the fuel tank in all the way until you've routed the fuel line. Now when you're pushing the fuel tank down, you want to insert the fuel line behind this plastic piece right here. So now the fuel tank's pushed in all the way down. So next you want to grab the line. It's got to go underneath the choke lever arm, which we've pulled out in the previous video. Then push the line in all the way toward the connector at the carburetor, right where my finger is there. And it should line right up with the connector. So now we want to connect the fuel line to the connector. I'm going to use the end of a small paintbrush, which is just basically a piece of wood. So I don't want to use a screwdriver because I don't want to puncture a hole in it. So I'm just going to line up the center hole of the fuel line. When I think it's lined up, I'm just going to push on the fuel line. Push it in as far as it will go. Here's a rear view of the fuel line. Just want to make sure that it's in there correctly. You can see that it's well connected on the connector. Everything else looks good, so we're just going to proceed with the rest of the installation. So now what we're going to do is to reinstall the choke lever in its correct position. Now all we need to do here is to push this down into the groove here, but before you do that, you want to make sure that this little lever pin here, whatever it's called, is up like this so that your switch will work properly. Then once you've got it in like this, just push down, it's going to snap in. Okay, and now the choke works. So when the switch is off, this lever touches the metal piece here, and when it's on, it loses contact. So check to make sure your choke and the switch are working, and then continue on. So now I'm going to continue on with the recoil installation, but before I do that, I've got to remove the oil cap completely from the fuel tank. I'll just simply reinstall the recoil. Make sure you lift up this arm from the brake. And this here goes over this pin here, just like that. Now I'm going to put back the oil cap in before I get a mess. And the fuel cap. Next, our torque screws go in. Got one here, you've got one over here, and there's one in front of the oil cap. And don't forget the one that holds part of the brake mechanism. Last thing is your cover. And we're done. Now I'm just going to fuel it up, and I'll just give it a quick startup just to make sure that everything's okay. So it runs good. One last thing you may want to do before you're completely and finally done is just take the cover off again, look at the fuel line down in there, and if you don't see any leaks anywhere, then the job's done right.